hear this clearly and receive it deeply. This is not an ordinary moment. This is a divine interruption. This is a spiritual alignment. This is a shift in atmosphere where lack is silenced and abundance is authorized. You are not here by accident. You are here because something is being activated over your life right now. Today we speak to systems, cycles, delays, and limitations, and we command them to respond. The weekend before you is not empty. It is loaded with favor, loaded with provision, loaded with supernatural solutions that money alone could not buy. Lift your faith higher than your fear, because when your faith speaks, heaven moves. Declaration of release. I declare every financial weight pressing on your mind is losing its grip. Every debt that has been draining your peace is being addressed at the root. Every closed door connected to income, opportunity, and provision is opening with force. You are stepping into a weekend where unexpected resources locate you, where help finds you, where answers accelerate, where burdens lift. What was stagnant is now moving. What was denied is now approved. What was delayed is now released. Commanding wealth alignment. I speak to your finances. Come into divine order. I speak to contracts, payments, bonuses, refunds, ideas, and opportunities. Respond now. Let wealth that has been held back by confusion be clarified. Let wealth that was blocked by resistance be rerouted. Let wealth that was delayed by timing be expedited. You will not beg. You will not struggle. You will not remain stuck. Provision is not chasing you. It is meeting you. Debt cancellation decree. Now hear this with authority. Every legal, financial, and emotional debt that has overstayed its season is being confronted. Every agreement that was draining more than it was producing is being rewritten. Every cycle of borrowing without breakthrough is being broken. You are not designed to live under constant pressure. You are designed to steward overflow. I declare reduction. I declare cancellation. I declare supernatural settlement. What took years to accumulate can be resolved faster than you imagined. Weekend shift. This weekend will not pass you by. As you rest, things are working. As you sleep, solutions are forming. As you believe, doors are unlocking. You will look back and say, something changed. You will testify, I don't know how, but it happened. You will walk into next week lighter, clearer, and stronger. This moment is presented as a divinely appointed intersection rather than a random point in time. The emphasis is that nothing about this encounter is accidental, delayed, or misplaced. Every listener is positioned within a precise spiritual window where alignment is taking place beyond what can be seen or measured. Time is portrayed as responding to divine authority, shifting from ordinary progression into a moment of accelerated purpose. What may have felt like waiting, stagnation, or silence is reframed as preparation for activation. The atmosphere itself is described as charged, meaning that unseen forces are already in motion before any visible result appears. The content underscores that spiritual activation does not depend on emotion, background, or current circumstances. It is not triggered by perfection, but by positioning. Simply being present, attentive, and receptive places the listener in alignment with a higher order already at work. Faith is not depicted as passive belief, but as an active response to a divine summons. When faith rises, it initiates movement in unseen realms, setting in motion systems that govern opportunity, provision, and favor. This activation shifts the listener from feeling like a spectator of life to becoming a participant in a purposeful unfolding. The concept of divine timing is emphasized as intentional and exact, not delayed or rushed. What appears late is actually synchronized. What feels early is actually preparation. The moment carries authority because it is aligned with an appointed sequence that cannot be duplicated or repeated. This creates urgency without panic and expectation without pressure. The listener is encouraged to understand that alignment does not mean everything changes instantly, but it does mean that everything begins responding differently from this point forward. There is a strong emphasis on the idea that atmospheres respond before circumstances do. Before finances shift, the mindset shifts. Before opportunities appear, perception changes. Before external doors open, internal resistance dissolves. This activation rewires how the listener interprets challenges, replacing frustration with anticipation. Instead of asking why things have not happened yet, the listener begins to recognize that something is unfolding beneath the surface, guided by precision rather than chance. The speech frames spiritual activation as a transfer of authority, where the listener moves from waiting for permission to operating in confidence. Alignment removes confusion and restores clarity, allowing decisions to be made without fear. The moment becomes a threshold where old cycles lose influence and new patterns gain momentum. Faith is no longer a reaction to crisis, but a stance of readiness. The listener is positioned to expect movement, recognize signals, and respond decisively as opportunities emerge, understanding that this activation marks the beginning of a reordered season where timing, purpose, and positioning work together rather than against them. The message of financial breakthrough is framed as a deliberate release rather than a distant hope. Wealth is presented not as something to chase endlessly, but as something that responds to alignment, authority, and readiness. The focus is on shifting the listener's relationship with provision, moving it from anxiety and scarcity into expectation and order. Financial increase is described as purposeful, assigned, and connected to timing rather than luck. What once felt withheld is revealed as being positioned for release at the right moment. The content emphasizes that wealth does not always arrive through predictable channels. Unexpected provision, new streams, ideas, and opportunities are highlighted as key mechanisms through which breakthrough manifests. This challenges the belief that financial growth must follow struggle or exhaustion. Instead, provision is shown as intelligent and strategic, locating the listener through divine orchestration. Help appears in forms that could not be planned, sourced through conversations, insights, or sudden openings that redirect the financial trajectory. There is strong emphasis on order and alignment within finances. Before increase manifests, confusion is addressed and misalignment is corrected. Financial clarity replaces chaos and direction replaces uncertainty. This breakthrough is not portrayed as reckless overflow, but as sustainable, structured increase. The listener is positioned to recognize that wealth responds to stewardship, discipline, and readiness. As order is restored internally, resources begin to flow externally with greater ease and consistency. The speech reinforces that financial resistance often operates through delay, fear, and mental exhaustion rather than lack itself. By addressing these internal barriers, the release of wealth accelerates. The listener is encouraged to see money not as an enemy or a constant source of stress, but as a tool that responds to authority and purpose. This reframing allows confidence to replace hesitation when opportunities present themselves. Breakthrough is also described as cumulative rather than isolated. Small openings lead to larger ones. One opportunity unlocks access to another. A single moment of favor creates momentum that compounds over time. The listener is positioned to expect progress rather than perfection, movement rather than instant completion. This removes pressure while maintaining expectation, allowing wealth to flow without overwhelming responsibility. The release of wealth is presented as timely, meaning it arrives when the listener is able to manage it wisely. This reinforces the idea that preparation determines capacity. Growth is not forced prematurely, but introduced when systems, mindset, and vision are aligned. The listener begins to understand that financial breakthrough is not merely about receiving more, but about sustaining more. This awareness transforms the experience of provision into something stable and empowering rather than temporary or fragile. The message ultimately establishes that wealth responds to authority, alignment, and action. As the listener speaks with confidence, thinks with clarity, and moves with intention, financial doors respond. Increase is no longer random or elusive, but coordinated and responsive, locating the listener within an atmosphere where provision is active, accessible, and consistently unfolding. The theme of debt cancellation is presented as a decisive interruption to long-standing financial pressure rather than a gradual or uncertain process. Debt is portrayed not only as a numerical obligation, but as an emotional and mental weight that restricts clarity, peace, and forward movement. The content reframes debt as something that has a season, and once that season expires, it no longer has authority to remain. This shifts the listener's mindset from resignation to expectation, replacing endurance with resolve. The message emphasizes that cycles of borrowing, repayment, and stress are not permanent identities. They are patterns that can be confronted, dismantled, and replaced. Debt is described as something that thrives in confusion, delay, and silence. When addressed directly, with clarity, authority, and intention, it begins to lose its grip. The listener is encouraged to recognize that financial obligations do not define their worth, future, or capacity to grow. This separation between identity and obligation becomes a critical turning point in how debt is perceived and handled. There is a strong focus on confronting the root rather than managing the symptom. Instead of endlessly rearranging payments or surviving month to month, the content points toward resolution and closure. Debt cancellation is framed as a restructuring of financial reality, where agreements that drain more than they produce are exposed and neutralized. This includes not only formal loans and balances, but also emotional debts such as guilt, pressure, and fear tied to financial decisions of the past. The speech highlights that financial release often begins with a shift in authority. When the listener stops reacting to debt and starts addressing it intentionally, momentum changes. Fear-driven decisions are replaced with strategic action. Confusion gives way to discernment. This shift allows solutions to surface. Negotiations, settlements, reductions, or unexpected interventions that were previously overlooked. What once felt immovable begins to respond because it is no longer being approached from a place of defeat. Debt cancellation is also connected to timing and readiness. Resolution is portrayed as accelerating when the listener is prepared to handle freedom responsibly. This reinforces the idea that cancellation is not escape, but transition. Freedom from debt creates space for growth, stewardship, and expansion. The listener begins to see that release is paired with responsibility, ensuring that cycles do not repeat themselves in new forms. The message further emphasizes that reduction and settlement are legitimate forms of breakthrough. Cancellation does not always mean instant disappearance. It can manifest as restructuring, relief, or significant reduction that restores breathing room and stability. These shifts are presented as strategic victories rather than partial success. Each adjustment weakens the hold of debt and strengthens the listener's financial position. Throughout the content, debt cancellation is framed as an act of restoration rather than loss. It restores peace, focus, and confidence. It restores the ability to plan beyond survival. It restores the freedom to build instead of merely maintain. As pressure lifts, clarity returns, and decisions are made from strength rather than desperation. The listener is positioned to move forward with a renewed sense of control, understanding that financial resolution is not only possible, but actively unfolding through alignment, authority, and intentional action. The emphasis on authority through declaration centers on the power of spoken intention to shift internal posture and external response. Words are not treated as casual expressions, but as instruments that establish direction, reinforce belief, and activate movement. Declaration is presented as a conscious act of alignment, where the listener chooses to speak from conviction rather than circumstance. This practice repositions the individual from reacting to conditions to commanding outcomes with clarity and confidence. The content reinforces that authority begins internally before it manifests externally. When a person speaks with certainty, it signals a shift in mindset from hesitation to leadership. Declarations are not emotional outbursts, but deliberate statements rooted in expectation and readiness. By verbalizing belief, the listener strengthens mental focus and interrupts patterns of doubt that often undermine progress. What is spoken repeatedly becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar gains influence over decisions and actions. There is a strong emphasis on consistency in declaration. Authority is not established through a single statement, but through sustained alignment between speech, thought, and behavior. Repeated declarations reinforce intention, train perception, and sharpen awareness. Over time, this practice conditions the listener to recognize opportunities that align with what has been spoken. Instead of overlooking possibilities, the listener becomes alert to signals that match declared outcomes. The message highlights that declaration is not denial of reality, but direction for it. Speaking with authority does not ignore challenges, it reframes them. Instead of allowing obstacles to define the narrative, declarations redefine the context in which challenges exist. This shift reduces emotional reactivity and replaces it with strategic thinking. The listener learns to respond rather than react, using words to anchor stability even when circumstances are uncertain. Authority through declaration is also linked to identity. When a person speaks from a place of clarity about who they are and what they are prepared to steward, confidence increases. This confidence influences posture, tone, and decision-making, creating coherence between intention and execution. Others respond differently to someone who speaks with conviction, and opportunities often open as a result of that perceived readiness and self-assurance. The content further emphasizes that declaration aligns internal belief with external action. Speaking clearly about goals, expectations, and outcomes reduces internal conflict and hesitation. It simplifies decision-making by creating a reference point for choices. When opportunities arise, the listener can assess them against what has already been declared, reducing confusion and second-guessing. This alignment accelerates momentum because energy is no longer divided between opposing thoughts. Declaration is portrayed as a catalyst rather than a conclusion. Words initiate movement, but they also demand responsibility. Once something is spoken with authority, it calls for corresponding action, discipline, and follow-through. This connection ensures that declarations remain grounded and effective rather than symbolic. Through intentional speech, the listener establishes boundaries, reinforces focus, and cultivates an environment where clarity, confidence, and progress reinforce one another continuously. The idea of a weekend shift is presented as a compressed window of accelerated change rather than a slow or extended process. Time is depicted as responsive, where a short period carries the potential to produce results that normally require much longer. This shift emphasizes momentum, highlighting that meaningful progress can occur quickly when alignment, expectation, and readiness converge. The listener is positioned to view the weekend not as a pause, but as an active phase where movement is taking place beneath the surface. The message reinforces that rest does not mean inactivity. While the body pauses, systems continue to operate. Decisions are influenced, circumstances are adjusted, and outcomes are prepared even in moments of stillness. This reframes rest as a strategic state rather than a loss of productivity. The listener is encouraged to release the pressure to force outcomes and instead trust that processes are unfolding with precision and intent during this limited time frame. Expectation plays a central role in accelerating results. The mindset carried into the weekend determines how opportunities are perceived and received. Anticipation sharpens awareness, allowing the listener to notice shifts that might otherwise go unrecognized. Small signs are treated as indicators of larger movement, reinforcing confidence rather than skepticism. This heightened awareness allows progress to compound quickly as recognition leads to response, and response leads to further momentum. The concept of acceleration also addresses timing. What was previously delayed is now positioned for resolution because resistance has weakened. The listener is encouraged to see that delays often serve to align multiple factors simultaneously. Once alignment is achieved, movement can be rapid and decisive. This understanding replaces frustration with trust, allowing the listener to remain focused rather than discouraged as results begin to emerge. There is emphasis on internal readiness as a catalyst for accelerated change. When clarity replaces confusion and confidence replaces hesitation, decisions are made more efficiently. This efficiency shortens the distance between opportunity and outcome. The listener begins to move with intention rather than uncertainty, which increases the speed at which results manifest. Acceleration is shown not as external pressure, but as internal alignment expressed through decisive action. The message also highlights that accelerated results are cumulative. One shift creates the conditions for the next. Momentum builds as each adjustment reinforces the next step forward. The listener is positioned to expect progress rather than immediate completion, understanding that acceleration does not eliminate process but intensifies it. This perspective prevents discouragement while sustaining motivation. The weekend shift is framed as a turning point where perception changes first, followed by tangible outcomes. As mindset shifts, behavior adjusts, and responses become more strategic. This internal change allows external conditions to reorganize rapidly. The listener becomes more adaptable, more observant, and more responsive, creating a feedback loop where awareness and action continuously reinforce progress within a condensed period of time. The call to action is centered on the understanding that belief without movement remains incomplete. Faith is presented as a catalyst that requires responsibility and intentional follow-through. The listener is encouraged to shift from passive expectation to active participation, recognizing that alignment invites opportunity, but action gives it direction. This balance between trust and responsibility transforms belief into momentum rather than wishful thinking. There is a strong emphasis on taking ownership of mindset. Thoughts are treated as strategic tools that influence behavior, perception, and decision making. By choosing focus over fear, the listener assumes authority over internal narratives that often sabotage progress. This intentional mental discipline creates consistency, allowing actions to reflect clarity instead of emotional fluctuation. Responsibility begins internally before it expresses itself externally. The message highlights that action does not always mean dramatic or risky moves. Often it begins with small, deliberate steps that reflect readiness and confidence. Responding to an opportunity, adjusting a plan, or making a disciplined choice reinforces alignment between belief and behavior. These actions signal preparedness, making it easier for progress to continue without resistance or hesitation. There is also emphasis on rejecting fear as a guiding force. Fear is portrayed as a limiter that distorts perception and delays response. By consciously refusing to make decisions rooted in fear, the listener opens space for discernment and strategic thinking. This shift does not eliminate uncertainty, but it prevents uncertainty from dictating outcomes. Courage becomes a practiced habit rather than a spontaneous reaction. The content reinforces accountability as a necessary component of growth. Once authority is claimed, responsibility follows. This means managing resources wisely, honoring commitments, and maintaining discipline even when motivation fluctuates. Accountability ensures that progress is sustained rather than temporary. The listener is positioned to understand that stewardship protects momentum and prevents regression into previous patterns. Action is also linked to awareness. Paying attention to timing, signals, and opportunities allows the listener to move efficiently rather than impulsively. Discernment becomes a form of action, guiding when to move, pause, or adjust direction. This awareness prevents wasted effort and strengthens outcomes by aligning energy with purpose. The call to action emphasizes consistency over intensity. Breakthrough is sustained through repeated aligned actions rather than isolated bursts of effort. By committing to steady progress, the listener builds confidence and resilience. Each action reinforces belief, and each belief strengthens resolve. This cycle creates forward motion that is both intentional and adaptable, allowing growth to continue without reliance on external validation or constant reassurance.